Good evening. Please come and find a seat if you can. Our meeting is about to begin. My name is Todd Eckloff. I'm the minister here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, and want to begin by welcoming all of you here on behalf of our church community. We're always glad to be able to use our space, to share our space, I should say, with our larger community for special events, especially events that our church is very happy and eager to be a part of. We've been a member of this community since 1887. Thank you. And since then, our church, as a member of this community, is concerned about the detrimental impacts of global warming that we're already seeing in our region, caused by what we believe is the continued overuse of fossil fuels, as well as their health hazards and possible derailments due to their transportation through our region. One of our challenges before us this evening is to discuss whether or not we have a right to protect our community from these dangers. Do our public officials have a right to ensure our safety against the interest of fossil fuel industries in particular? Some don't think so. Some of you here may not think so. Just this week, you may have heard that TransCanada filed a lawsuit against our nation for stopping the Keystone Pipeline, claiming that under our current international trade agreements, we have no right to protect our health or the health of our environment. Today, there are also industries beyond our borders of our state claiming that we also have no right to keep our community safe or our environment healthy if it threatens private interest. Yet there are others who would answer yes, probably some of you here tonight, that we have every right and obligation to protect our environment and our public health, whatever the cost to private interest. Just last week, for example, while TransCanada was preparing its lawsuit against us, the Oakland City Council banned the use of rail lines for the transport of coal and crude oil. And last month, the Grant Township in Pennsylvania passed a law making civil disobedience and direct action legal. So that its citizens can safely protest wastewater injection wells for the fracking of gas without getting arrested. And as we all know, on June 6th of this month, after a derailment in Mosier, Oregon, involving an oil train that came through our city, our own city council passed a resolution asking Union Pacific to halt the transport of these hazardous materials through our city, and our governor has since asked them to stop transporting them through our entire state. So we are very pleased that we can host what really should be a dialogue for those who are here on either side of the issue to discuss what we can do, what we should do, what we must do as a community to protect our environment, to protect our health, and to keep our community safe. And so I want to wind up my welcome by thanking our city council members for those who are here, but also for helping to call for this forum, to put it on, to bring so many from the community who have an interest in these issues to come here today. And I think we should give them a big hand too for recognizing the time is now and being one of those cities in our country that is taking progressive steps on this issue. So they are looking forward to hearing from you, and we have no one better to thank than the council member who has actually, this meeting was his brainchild, and he has called for this forum and is really hoping to learn from you today so that the city council, as well as himself, will know the best way for us to proceed as a community. He really called for this meeting because he wants to learn today. He wants to know what you think. So please welcome Councilmember Brian Beggs.
Thank you all so much for being here and coming to the summit. We are a city council. There's some rules that we can't have too many of us in a room at any one time unless we have an official meeting and an official notice. And so I would, on behalf of Public Safety Committee Chair Lori Kinnear, like to convene a special meeting of the Public Safety Committee for the City Council. And I wanted to recognize Councilmember Kinnear, Councilmember Fagan, Councilmember Mumm as part of the meeting. The only piece on our agenda really is to go through the speakers and hear from people today, but we did want to make it an official meeting, and so I think this is probably the most people we've ever had at a Public Safety Committee meeting, so thanks for joining in. I wanted to acknowledge just a few people who helped put this on, and I want to start with Dave Fish on the soundboard. Thanks, Dave. Bill Miller, musician, AV person. Alex Scott from council staff helping us out here. Thanks, Alex. Eric Thompson from TV5, who's making a permanent record. I had some help from Sage, Andrew, Bridget, and Fiona on getting things organized. Thank you, wherever you guys are. I see you somewhere around there. And particularly the UU Church and the Social Justice Coordinating Council for really inviting us and hosting us. Thank you all so much. So I just wanted to set the context, and it is about learning about perspectives. So often, in the media, there seems to be one version of the problem, one version of the truth, one version of the solution, except that there's 20, and everyone's arguing about which one is the right one. And I wanted to convene a meeting where we really heard from a broad perspective of different people, from different political walks, from different government hats, to find out what their concerns are about these fossil fuel trains and what their ask is for making it better. And I really, for myself, am holding the truth that there is no one right answer. There are just many answers, and together we can perhaps do the impossible, which is make Spokane and the entire world safer from the hazards that we're facing, from whether it's an actual derailment to climate change in itself. And so I would ask you to honor anyone that's willing to risk to come up here and share their perspective, and honor that and with them. We're gonna run through a bunch of speakers, pretty much 5 minutes apiece. They're gonna come, give their perspective, and then they're gonna sit down, and I'll call up the next one. And then at the end of that time, they're all gonna join us in the back and be ready to talk with you more in depth about anything you want to know. Towards the end of the presentations, there's gonna be some more discussion about potential legislative things that the council or the voters could do. So we're going to kind of build towards some from the practical to some of that. But we have some really great people. So with that, I'm just going to start off and ask Assistant Fire Chief Brian Schaefer to come up from Spokane Fire Department.
I think Brian really did a very good job at opening this up and explaining that we all have different perspectives. It's a complex issue. I wouldn't even call it a problem. It's a complex challenge that our community owns, hazardous materials going through our community. So my lens, my perspective, or the lens that I look out when I'm approached with this challenge is making sure that our firefighters go home at the end of their shift, first and foremost, and making sure that all your lives are protected, not just in the immediate moment, but also into the future. So in the case of hazardous materials, like we saw with Pacific Steel, with the chlorine leak that we had several months ago, actually almost a year ago, we know that when chemicals are released, they can have lasting impacts. We want to try to avoid those impacts from ever occurring. Anytime in my business where we can prevent an incident, an accident, a tragedy from occurring, we want to do that. So the perspective from the fire department, obviously, is if there's a way that we could reduce the risk of a derailment of this product coming through our communities, we want to have that conversation with the shippers. If there's another way to avoid the risk of this product being shipped through our communities, we also want to engage the shippers in that conversation as well. My lens, again, and I'm probably short on time here, but my lens is strictly through the safety of everybody in this room, your family, the people that go through our communities, the employees that are on those trains, the employees that are working the track, as first and foremost with our firefighters. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And Brian's going to have to leave a little earlier because he has some other commitments, but I really appreciate you coming out. And I meant to say one other thing is that although we're having a city council committee here, anyone who's speaking is speaking on their own behalf, and we're not endorsing any particular message, but just really celebrating everyone's chance to speak. So the next speaker I'd like to bring up is Mayor Rod Higgins from the city of Spokane Valley. Thanks, Mayor.
Missed the memo on Casual Wednesday. Spokane Valley is divided by two railroads, Burlington Northern, BNSF, and Union Pacific, UP. That presents a physical problem to the valley, of course. There are 8+ crossings where vehicles, people, whatever, can cross. We would like to do something about that, and we're in the process of doing something about that. There are 4 major crossings that if we can get grant money to make them like, if you're familiar with the valley, like Argonne, where there's an underpass or an overpass, and trains and vehicles who don't play well together don't get to play together, okay? We'll be in pretty good shape. Those intersections are Park Road, Pines Road, Broadway, Sullivan, and Barker. The total cost, if we could pull that all off, is about $100 million. Okay? So this isn't something we're going to solve tomorrow morning. These present, of course, significant safety and connectivity problems. Safety, of course, can be measured in a lot of different ways, but think about it like this. Think of school children crossing railroad tracks to get to school. Think of fire trucks trying to get to an emergency, or a police car trying to get somewhere, or a school bus. Now you're looking at BNSF, which is running 60 trains a day right now through the valley. Okay, so what? Well, each one of those trains is roughly 1.5 miles long. At every one of those 8 stops, it's blowing its horn. Somebody is being annoyed by that horn. Okay? Now then, yes, I've heard them. Union Pacific is running right now, I think, 10 trains, going to 20. BNSF is talking about upwards of 100 trains within the next 5 to 7 years. Think about that. If we can't bridge the valley, and that's how you see it in the paper, bridging the valley, if we can't do that, we've got a major problem. Now, let's talk about problems in general. First, as I mentioned, vehicles and trains just don't get along real well in the same pathway. Horns, I've already mentioned. I'll say it again. Those engineers at 2 a.m. love to blast those horns. Okay? They just do. And they're protected by law. It's their option to do it, but they're protected by law. So, that brings me around to another point, which is the railroads in general have been not really willing to step up to the plate and work with us. Okay? They have competition problems, UP and BNSF. The problem that they have here in Spokane is apparently mirrored someplace in Texas, and so as a result, they didn't want to talk about it. They don't want to sit down together and help us solve a problem. Then, remember that all of this, and this is often overlooked, is happening over our aquifer. Okay? That's our drinking water. And the facilities to address a major catastrophe, the closest ones are in Missoula and the Tri-Cities. Why in the world, with the major population center in eastern Washington, don't we have one here? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to invite Laura Ackerman from the Lands Council up now. And I just want to give you a little acknowledgement, Laura, as you come up, in that she has really led the charge in keeping us informed about what's happening in Mosier and all over the state as cities struggle with what can we do. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. I'm Laura Ackerman of the Lands Council. Thank you, Councilmember Beggs, for inviting me to speak. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thank you to the, and correct me if I get this wrong, the Public Safety Committee of the City Council, and to the Unitarian Universalist Church for hosting this. The Lands Council opposes the building of new fossil fuel infrastructures, and we would like to move to a clean, renewable energy in the Northwest for three main reasons. And the first is that crude oil transport via rail is not safe. That's pretty clear. Coal trains and crude oil also both create some severe traffic problems. It's a safety issue, as the mayor of the valley just told you. That's also true in Cheney. And the transport of coal and oil and the combustion of coal and oil are significant forms of air pollution and the diseases associated with air pollution. And the third reason is very simple, which is also very complex, and that's global warming. So I want to talk about the safety issue because I work a lot on this. So since Lac Megantic in July of 2013, we've had like 13 significant derailments of oil, either Bakken or oil sands across Canada and the United States. You know, the most recent one was in Mosier. So the industry, the rail industry, likes to tout their 0.0023% of trains carrying hazardous materials derail. And it doesn't sound like very much, but when you look at the gorge, just in this particular case, because I want to talk about Mosier, and when you look at the average length of trains where they travel, trip distance, all of that kind of stuff, a derailment actually happens every 30 months. And if Vancouver Energy is built, or Tesoro Savage, that's in Vancouver, that goes down to 18 months where you can have a derailment. These kinds of accidents are not merely inconvenient. You know, Mosier really got lucky because they did not have a fire in their town like Lac Megantic. But make no mistake, the people who live in Mosier just suffered greatly. There's a lot of psychological suffering in cases like this as well. And so the 0.0023% failure rate is just really not a good game plan. And briefly, I want to talk about some other concerns that I have. Coal and oil trains are the heaviest, and they wear on the tracks the DOT 111s and the CPC 1232s, which were the cars at Mosier. And in some of the other derailments, they won't be phased out until 2025 and replaced with DOT 117s. The current DOT 105s are actually safer, but they're pressurized, so they hold less. So crude oil, you get less in them. Crude oil makes money. We should have tank cars that withstand a fire for 13 hours before they can explode. Right now, the regulation is 100 minutes, not 800 minutes. And Bakken has a lot of flammable gases in it, like butane and propane. You've heard about stabilizing oil. North Dakota has a standard of 13.7 for vapor pressure. And it does cost money to stabilize oil, by the way. But in Lac Megantic and Mosier, they were both around 9.2. They still exploded. We could drastically slow down trains in urban areas to about 12 miles an hour. That's going to totally upset capacity issues, so it's not going to happen. Railroads need to pay for their derailments and for the subsequent problems with them. Well, in Washington State, UP and BNSF have told the Washington Utilities and Transportation Council that they have a $700 million worst case scenario. And I'm going to have, and so for all those reasons, several others, we don't think that they're safe, and they need to come off the tracks until they can be proven to be safe. Air pollution is the biggest killer in the world, and this is a quote from Frederica Pereira of the Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. The single most important action we can take for our children and their future is to cure our addiction to fossil fuels. They are so bad for children. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of studies that show you this. Global warming. So I've been to every single hearing. There have been 7 in Spokane. And I've heard hundreds and hundreds of people testify in Spokane and across the state. And they all talk about how global warming is bad for us. And we've had record comments on Tesoro Savage, on Longview, the coal exporting hearing. So people are really concerned about this. And this is really what, we are an up-rail community, and this is a really important thing, is you cannot ignore us. The railroads cannot ignore us. Fossil fuels, no matter where the facilities are located, are a global issue. Thank you.
All right, now I'd like to invite up Jerry White, who is the Spokane River Keeper. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you very much to the City Council for having me out, and the Unitarian Church, and thank you all for being here. My name is Jerry White Jr. I am the Spokane River Keeper, public advocate for our Spokane River. The lens through which I see this issue is very clearly through the issue of the Spokane River and the aquifer. And I want to be very direct and very clear. From our point of view, we feel the industry is asking us as a community to risk our river every day in the face of this traffic with very little benefit. You heard Laura say $700 million cap on the liability for this. Talk to the folks in Kalamazoo, Michigan. They've spent far, far more than that trying to clean up the diluted, the dilbit oil in their river from the pipeline break. So, very serious issue. We feel very strongly that the river is at risk with this traffic. This bridge video that we are going to watch, I would just like to set that in context. I worked with the Waterkeeper Alliance. We did a survey of over 200 bridges. This is the Waterkeeper Alliance. So these are water keepers across the United States, looked at rail infrastructure bridges in their watersheds and inspected them and came up with something like over 140 of these bridges looked visually like they may be compromised. I'm not an engineer, not a structural engineer. If there is one out there, I'd love to talk to you later after this. But certainly to the layperson, if you look at this video, you look at this infrastructure, I think it's cause for concern, especially in light of Mosier. Before we watch this, I'd like to thank Dancing Crow Media. Joe and Rosie Innes put this video together, and without them, couldn't have done this. So, go ahead. We're on the Spokane River today, doing a systematic look at the infrastructure deficiencies on these rail bridges. This is a very key component to river safety and community safety because we are expecting, if the refining capacity out on the West Coast gets built out, we could see as many as 90 oil trains a week over this bridge and one other bridge. We're in the choke point for all of the Bakken River crude that comes through our area between Sandpoint and Spokane. So this rail infrastructure is a key component to all of the coal and all of the crude oil that's moving through our area. We feel that there are serious deficiencies and that in fact Burlington Northern Santa Fe, as well as the oil industry itself, really is kind of jamming all of this petrochemical traffic through an infrastructure corridor that's not ready to handle it. These are some of the kinds of things we're seeing right here. We are down at the bottom of the footing of a rail bridge, and you can see that below this giant rail bridge footing is crib work. And on the upriver side of this is just loose, unconsolidated stone that's been washed out of here during high water periods. As that's happened, we're actually noticing some settling and some cracking in certain places. If you look across the way, there's a massive crack that's about 2 to 3 inches wide that runs right down the center of the footing. Not to mention, on these kinds of footings here, you know, there's really nothing under this upriver side of the footing to hold it as it settles. If we had a rail accident with Bakken River crude oil coming into our river right here, it would be an unmitigated catastrophe. During high flow periods, there'd really be no effective way to stop that oil or an oil fire for hours and hours, if not days. Not to mention recovering our ecosystem, which does include native red band trout in this area, would take years to recover if it did at all.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Joe and Rosie over here, filmmakers extraordinaire. Great work. I'd like to invite up Mike Lascola from the Spokane Regional Health District.
Hi, folks. At the Health District, naturally, we deal with long-term health issues. I am a site manager for contaminated sites. And I can tell you that once a contaminant is released, it's very, very difficult to clean up. With my concern and with our concern, in the event of a derailment with Bakken crude, naturally, we were concerned about the aquifer, but where there's much less resource, we're going to be out in the more rural areas. And the impact of groundwater and soil contamination to private wells and soils can be devastating, extremely expensive, and take many, many years to clean up. Additionally to these types of incidents, there are concerns with this happening in an urban area. And one aspect that we don't often touch upon is the fact that once this contaminant gets down around the foundations of buildings, the buildings literally either need to be torn down or they're going to have to be retrofitted so that vapor intrusion from the contaminant and the pollutant doesn't come in and harm the occupants. These are concerns of mine. What I'm talking about here is the fact that we're on the potentially risky hook for doing long-term monitoring of air, water, and soils. In addition to the fact that we're going to have to do many community health assessments to determine if this particular accident has caused any cancerous or non-cancerous effects to our communities. Many of you are aware of doing cancer cluster investigations, and if not, I can tell you they're extremely detailed, and they do point the finger towards certain contaminants. Bakken crude would be one of them. So I've been involved with this through different committees. One in particular is our LEPC committee because of community right to know laws. We had an exercise, it was in Millwood about 1.5 years ago, I believe. And what stood out to me was the fact that, you know, you hear about spending money on emergency response and emergency response equipment, and I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful stuff. But it does not stop the environmental impact of the spill of this material. what you're going to find is that your emergency crews are going to be very concerned with saving human lives. And so it's going to take, at a minimum, at the best, they'll get there in 5 hours. And then it's going to be a question of searching for resources. Say, for instance, you wanted to get a heavy equipment operator out there with sand to build a berm to keep this oil from getting into the river. Do we have any heavy equipment operators available that have their 40-hour hazardous materials training? So we couldn't find one to go out there. So what I'm saying here is this: we're very well, how should I say, we're very well prepared to take care of human life, but the long-term environmental impact is going to cost lots of money that we don't have, and it could be very devastating to our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I'd like to invite Tom Soldner up from the Upper Columbia River Group of the Sierra Club.
Thanks to all who had anything to do with putting together this event. There's a concept we should keep in mind as we consider these issues of dangerous trains, of the mining, transportation, and use of fossil fuels, and of the health and safety of our community. The soundbite is often attributed to Ralph Nader, but we know the concept as the everyday wisdom of our Native American sisters and brothers. We should strive to be good ancestors. It's a piece with our tribal compatriots' wisdom of the 7th generation stewardship. That is, that our decisions should be made in consideration of their effects upon the following 7 generations. These days, we're suffering the consequences of our failing at 7th generation stewardship in the health of our human communities and the health of the environment, which are inextricably linked. We've forgotten, sometimes it seems entirely, as Thomas Berry noted in his Principles of the Universe, that the universe is a community of subjects, not a collection of objects. The land and air and water and all their creatures should be represented here this evening. Life on this planet is about honoring the diversity of all of those subjects, not objects, subjects. And that will allow for the communion that is necessary if we are to address these issues responsibly and wisely. As a Spokane community, we are members of a much wider community as well, a universal community, if you will. And we are nourished and instructed and healed by that wider community. And in and through it, we enter into the mystery for which we depend upon all daily life. At our best, we should be seeking the common good, a good for the whole community of life. And so our gathering here cannot just be about coal and oil trains or about the safety of Spokane residents. It's also about the context within which these problems exist. It's about a society that always seeks the quick fix, the one generation or half generation fix, which is not stewardship at all. The Sierra Club's motto is explore, enjoy, protect the planet. And therefore, we've been involved for many years in addressing climate change. Since 2002, most of you know, our Beyond Coal campaign has worked to close dirty power plants and address the problems of dirty fuel transportation and prevent new shipping ports for dirty fuels. More recently, the Beyond Oil campaign was instituted to block the most dangerous oil projects and revoke the oil industry's license to operate above the law and interfere with our nation's transition to clean energy. So we understand the need for Spokane and Spokane Valley to address the serious danger to its citizens and firefighters that we face from both coal and oil trains. And as a local Sierra Club group, we support those efforts. However, we're convinced that there's an even larger issue, that is the climate crisis that must be addressed in relation to the transportation of fossil fuels. Climate change must be challenged in every possible way because it affects not only the lives of every person in Spokane County, whether they live near the tracks or not, but also this good earth and all its creatures. The irresponsibility of coal and oil and rail transportation companies must be addressed not just for the sake of the immediate safety of citizens. That's important, that's very important, but not just for that. The greatest irresponsibility is their contribution to climate change and to its threat to all life as we know it, for our children and our grandchildren. And therefore, the Sierra Club's Upper Columbia River Group supports a working ban to coal and oil transportation on the basis of safety concerns and climate change, and encourages the Spokane City Council to place a proposed charter amendment doing that directly onto a citizen's ballot. Spokane area residents and our local habitat have a right both to public safety and to a healthy climate. And in that work with you, we must all strive to be good ancestors. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to invite up Dorothy Tibbetts from, you're gonna have to give me your title, but she's from the Eastern Regional Office of Drinking Water. I believe she's the regional manager.
That's right.
All right.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Dorothy Tibbetts. I'm the regional manager for the Washington Department of Health Office of Drinking Water. And what we do in our office is regulate public water systems on the east side of the state. We work for a state agency. I have counterparts on the west side. And our mission is to protect the health of the people of Washington state by ensuring safe and reliable drinking water. So we oversee, through our regulatory authority, public drinking water systems in Washington. And of course, being a public health agency, we want to, as much as possible, engage in prevention of problems rather than responding to high-risk situations. But at the same time, we do work to position water systems to respond to the realities of what we are dealing with today, including a potential Mosher-like scenario that could happen here in Spokane. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the requirements are for public water systems and what I know about what's happening here with the City of Spokane Water Department and the other public water systems in the Spokane Valley, Spokane area. Public water systems are required to develop wellhead protection programs. Most of the, if not all of the public water systems in our area, their sources of public water supply are from groundwater. They have wells drilled. Some are influenced by the aquifer. Others are less influenced by the aquifer or not at all because of their distance from the aquifer. All public water systems are required to develop a wellhead protection program. And that program, for example, the City of Spokane, in their wellhead protection program, what they have done is documented hydrogeological features of the area that help them, their engineers and professional hydrogeologists understand how water moves underground. They do things like map the flow of water. They determine within certain zones, 200 feet, 800 feet, and out farther and farther, the time of travel of potential contaminants and when those contaminants would provide risk to public health and the health of the customers of the drinking water systems. The wellhead protection program requires them to develop a contaminant inventory. They inventory all the businesses that might have potential pollution that could be a possible problem. Things that might be risk of spilling over the aquifer or even over other wellhead areas, and to make predictions about how those might move into the drinking water supply. The document also includes how the public water systems, like the city of Spokane, would respond in the event that there's a spill. So let's just suppose there were a spill. You might be curious about how our public water systems would be impacted. We would be notified. They're required to notify the Department of Health. Our goal is to prevent the contaminated water from reaching the public water, prevent people from being exposed to the contamination through drinking water. So through the work they've done to understand how the contaminant might flow toward the wellheads, we would engage with the Department of Ecology, understand how they're going to respond to the spill, monitor through sampling and other ways to understand what's happening. And the most important thing is communicating with the public about what's going on. And if there's a risk that the contaminant has reached drinking water, and we're very conservative in estimating those risks, we would develop public notification, tell the public not to drink the water. First, however, the city does have a fairly robust plan for providing alternate supplies. A couple of folks, the mayor, Jerry, spoke about our aquifer, and there's a good supply of water, and the city has wellheads in areas that could be used to supply the water system, while at the same time they're turning off those wells that might be contaminated or impacted or something like that. And so it's all very interdisciplinary. Emergency response is very team-oriented. We'd work with local health to ensure that we're addressing the problem and that we also recover as quickly as possible to maintain our public water supplies. I do agree that prevention is most important. This is just one aspect. People mention drinking water often when we're talking about trains. There would be other impacts, of course, that the State Department of Health would be involved with, including air issues that could be associated with an emergency like this, and other issues as well. So thank you for letting me say a few words about worst case scenarios and best case of managing those kinds of emergencies. And I look forward, if you have any questions later on, I'll be in the back of the room. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Dave Kovac up from one of Spokane's own firefighters and a member of, I think, the union executive team. How do you? Tell us what your position is. Yeah,
thank you. I'd like to thank Councilman Beggs and the rest of the City Council for giving me the opportunity to come up and say a few words today. My name is Dave Kovac. I'm here on behalf of the Spokane Firefighters Union. I'm the Secretary of IAFF Local 29. We represent 315 professional firefighters that work in the city of Spokane and the Spokane Airport, who in the event of a major oil train derailment in our city would be the first on scene to attempt to mitigate the disaster. The recent accident in Mosier highlights a danger that we as first responders have been aware of for some time. As first responders, we do our best to prepare for any eventuality or hazard which may beset our community, and we're doing our best to prepare for this one as well. The problem is that should an accident, such as the one that took place in Oregon, take place here in downtown Spokane, there's no amount of preparation, no level of staffing, no amount of equipment or apparatus or personnel that would keep this from being anything less than cataclysmic to our community. Since 2014, the Washington State Council of Firefighters, of which we are a charter member since 1937, has been lobbying to halt the movement of Bakken crude by rail until there's been a determination, that it's safe to transport. After the Oregon incident, we petitioned Governor Inslee to take action on this threat to our communities, and I would like to paraphrase, if I may, briefly, the message that we sent to the governor. Dear Governor Inslee, the oil train derailment and fire in Mosier, Oregon is a stark reminder that as the first responders, rail workers, communities, waterways, and pristine lands remain in harm's way from Bakken oil train traffic through our state. The account given by firefighters of the Mosier response and by others who have responded to similar incidents across North America make it clear that these fires are exceedingly difficult to extinguish even under ideal circumstances. What happened in Mosier could just as easily have happened in a population center like Spokane or Seattle, resulting in even greater tragedy. In that letter, we called upon the governor to partner with Oregon Governor Dan Brown by asking the U.S. Department of Transportation to use its authority to prohibit rail transport of Bakken crude through our state until there's been a full investigation into the cause of the Mosier oil train derailment. Since that time, Governor Inslee has called for a halt to Union Pacific trains hauling Bakken crude through Washington, and that's a start. We would encourage the governor to extend that ban to all rail traffic. In addition to halting the rail traffic, we've asked the governor to use his executive authority to reject plans for new oil terminals that are currently under review. Ladies and gentlemen, as first responders, we take seriously our duty to protect the lives and property of our communities. That protection always starts with prevention. Preventing the rail companies from transporting this highly dangerous fuel through our communities is vital because these incidents will happen again. They've happened in Quebec, they've happened in Alabama, they've happened in North Dakota, they've happened in New Brunswick and Lynchburg, Virginia. In a 3-week period last year, there were accidents in Illinois, West Virginia, and twice in Ontario. In all, there have been 28 oil train derailments, according to the New York Times, and now it has occurred here on the Columbia River in Mosier, Oregon. We hope that it does not happen here in Spokane, where these trains rumble through our downtown core several times a day. But, in the words of John Norman, a giant in the fire service community, hope is not an effective strategy. I suppose we should feel lucky that this most recent incident happened in a sparsely populated part of our region, and the 42,000 gallons of crude that were released didn't defile the Columbia more than just incidentally. The residents of Mosier, however, aren't feeling so fortunate, I'm thinking. And while I have spoken of the challenges to first responders, truly, the cost of these accidents goes far beyond the cost of mitigation. Depending on where they occur, the overall economic and environmental cost of these accidents can be incalculable. So we train and we prepare, but most importantly, we must prevent. And that's what I would call on our elected leaders to do today. Consider the threats to the citizens of our region in allowing these transports to continue. Stop the construction of new oil terminals in the state of Washington and stop these trains from passing through our community in order to prevent the catastrophes that are surely to come again. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, I'd like to invite Rick Eichstadt up on behalf of Gonzaga Law School's Environmental Law Clinic.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Rick Eichstadt. I'm the director of the Environmental Law Clinic and of the Center for Justice. I want to thank first Todd Eckloff and the Unitarian Universalist Church for hosting us. I want to thank Brian Beggs and the members of the City Council. I want to thank other elected officials such as Mayor Higgins, agency folks, firefighters, and all of you for coming. This is a very important discussion. I also want to thank Garrett Wilson. Garrett, raise your hand. He's one of my students from Gonzaga who helped pull together the information that I'm going to discuss. So I have a really unattractive job here. I've got to explain in 5 minutes or less preemption, which also is the wet blanket on these discussions. But I think it's important for all of us to understand what we're going to hear, if we try to do things. And just to be positive, I'm gonna give my own opinion at the end with what I think we should do, because this is going to be something we have to deal with. So if you haven't heard about preemption, it was in the song. Preemption is basically the railroad's tool that they're going to use to try to stop any local control. And unfortunately, they've got the Congress and they've got the courts on their side. Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act and the Federal Railroad Security Act, which generally preempt any attempts by local government and most attempts by state government to regulate any aspects of railroad operations. So under these acts, the courts have held that cities cannot regulate or criminalize transportation of dangerous substances near residential areas. They may not determine the times railroads can operate to improve public safety, and they can't mandate a pollution permit process. So what can they do? Well, the courts have, given some crumbs and said, well, you can do things that don't interfere with interstate commerce. So police activities, electrical, fire, and plumbing codes. Okay, that's really helpful. So the later law, the Federal Railroad Safety Act, did create an exemption for state law related to train safety, but courts have said that's just state law, it's not local law. And specifically, the exemption states that a state may enact railroad safety law that is more stringent than federal law if doing so is necessary to eliminate or reduce an essentially local safety or security hazard. Well, that sounds great, particularly a place like the Spokane, where we've got our aquifer, we've got the Spokane River. Well, it's great till it gets to the courts, which again are, rule these in preemption in almost every case in favor of the railroads. In one particular case from 2003, a community like ours wanted to protect its river, and the court said, and this is a quote, more than 10,000 miles of track are adjacent to waterways in North America. Individuals dependent on their local waterways in every case would be devastated should an accident occur. And therefore, it's not a local issue and it's preempted. So this isn't the good news. So whatever we do, if we put it on the ballot, if we pass it, whatever's going to happen, we're going to face this issue of preemption. And I know there's a lot of debate, charter, ordinance, what should happen. Here's my opinion. Let's not wait for the railroad and the railroad money and its allies like GSI to tell us in state court that it can't be on the ballot. We've seen it with efforts by Spokane Move to Amend and Envision Spokane, where they went to Superior Court, they went to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court and kept these measures off of the ballot. I think we've got the attention of our elected officials. We've had overwhelming support on this matter at all the public hearings. We've got a lot of people here. Let's skip the ballot. Let's pass this now. And let's, instead of waiting for the railroad to say, why we can't have it on the ballot, let's pass it and force them to go to court and tell us why we can't enforce a law that our city council passed in response to overwhelming support. So, thank you.
Thanks, Rick. And I'd like to invite up Dr. Gunnar Holmquist right now from Direct Action Spokane.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm here to speak for those without a voice. So that's our children, our grandchildren, and those that haven't been born yet, whose future will be robbed by climate change, by an overheated planet, if we don't do something. I'm part of a group called Direct Action Spokane. We formed nearly a year ago. And those in the audience that are in Direct Action, could you stand? I'd like to recognize you. These are regular. Over the past 2 months, we've been meeting with members of the City Council to try to persuade them to place on the ballot this fall our proposal to amend the city charter to directly outlaw all coal and crude oil transportation by rail through Spokane, like Oakland did 2 days ago on coal. Now, that's a pretty bold proposition. There better be a lot of evidence behind it to say that. There is. I've been in science my whole life, 35 years as a physician, the rest of it in science research. I've never seen such a gargantuan accumulation of evidence to show we are in deep trouble. And every credible scientific body in the world is in agreement with this. And climate change really poses the most serious threat to human health and to human civilization ever. That's a big thing to say, but it's true. Each single piece of evidence I'm about to review with you should by itself be enough for us to take immediate bold action. But seeing all combined, it's clearly madness for us to continue this fossil fuel economy. We all remember last summer when climate change finally hit us in the face. We broke hot temperature records all over the country, 6,000 of them. And when the fires came, breaking records, at one point there were 500 fires burning in Washington, and the acres of forest consumed were 15 times average. Our air quality became the worst in the nation, and for weeks our skies were blackened. Climate change arrived in Spokane. And it's now predicted that the colossal forests of the Pacific Northwest will all burn because they won't have time to regrow again. They'll be burned the next year. And so our great forests will become savanna grasslands, and the mountains will be bare rock and dirt, which will further accelerate climate change because our forests are one of the planet's primary air conditioners. And we learned that the ocean water in Puget Sound was too acidic, and the water temperature of the Columbia River was too warm to support the salmon smolt, and they all died. The Columbia River, one of the largest and most clean rivers left in the world, couldn't give life to salmon, the heart and soul of this region, for thousands of years. Then a short time later, we had a record windstorm in Spokane. One can imagine the frightening incineration of our city had that windstorm happened on a hot day. That happened to Fort McMurray in Canada. Do you remember this? The city was destroyed. It was just last month. Given that every year breaks the records of the prior year, it's only a matter of time before Spokane burns. We must realize this is true. In 2015, 2016 have become record years worldwide for heat, hurricanes, superstorms, forest fires, floods, and drought. A month ago in northern India, crops failed and thousands died because the temperature was 124 degrees. In Minnesota, instead of having a severe flood event on a 1,000-year cycle, they've had 4 of those severe floods in 12 years. There's nothing subtle about this. In late December, the North Pole was 50 degrees above normal. We learned recently that half of the corals in Australia's Great Barrier Reef are dead. This is the largest coral reef in the world. And it, like the rest of the world's coral reefs, is steadily dying. There's also a new type of forest fire. It's never happened before, occurring in Alaska, Canada, and Norway, which is the massive burning of the boreal forests in the Arctic. An ominous milestone occurred this March. The average temperature of the world's northern hemisphere was 2 degrees Celsius above normal, exceeding the 1.5 degree turning point that scientists have been warning us about for 3 decades. The Earth is warming rapidly. We must stop waiting for someone else to fix it, and we must stop these trains. What are our governments doing to address this crisis? For 25 years, world leaders have been meeting to discuss climate change, and now we have an international, non-binding Paris Agreement from last summer. Useless. It's useless. The massive, endless trainloads of carbon continue down the tracks to be burned. We cannot rely on officials, on powers at the top to do something. We can't wait for Governor Inslee, for state legislature, or Congress. We must act ourselves in our own community from the ground up. And we can easily do this, as others have said already tonight. Strangely, the only major governmental body that I know of that has made a stand directly on climate change is an unlikely player. It's the Department of Defense. For the past few years, they've stated the most significant threat to national security is not North Korea, Russia, the Middle East, or ISIS. It's climate change, because they know the science. They know Greenland's mammoth ice sheets are melting much more rapidly than we expected. If it melts off, the oceans will rise 20 feet. Well, why would that matter? It would. And if all the world's ice melts, which it appears it will if we don't do something, sea levels will rise how much? 220 feet. Now, 1 billion people live close or at sea level. So the Department of Defense knows what's going to happen. It's that catastrophe in combination with heat-induced crop failures, weather chaos, and failed economies. The DoD knows we will face titanic, monstrous wars that we've never seen before. You know, the world can't even manage the displacement of 2 million Syrian climate refugees. Look what's happened. Nationalism, separation, the hell with them. That's 2 million. Imagine trying to take care of 500 times that, climate refugees. And these are people that will not only not have a place to live or an economy to live by, but they will be very angry people at us, Europe, Russia, Japan, China. They didn't burn all that carbon, those people that have lost their countries. We burned that carbon. So are we going to continue to allow a couple of corporations to endlessly extract carbon from the earth, burn it all, and kill off our salmon, our forests, our fisheries, our coral reefs, our civilizations, and throw us into unthinkable wars? No. We are not going to let them kill our grandchildren. There are over 200 municipalities across the United States that have adopted laws which ban harmful corporate activities on the basis of those people's constitutional rights to decide the fate of their own communities. We have to challenge the courts to recognize those community rights, and that's what our charter amendment proposal does. We can stop this. There are alternatives to burning carbon. There's clean energy from the sun, and lots of it, way, way more than enough. So the total amount of solar surface area needed to power all the energy needs of humans on the planet is the size of Spain. It's tiny, it's minuscule. There are cities being designed now that would be powered entirely by renewable clean energy. There are several cities in the US that mandate all new construction have solar roofs. We can do the same in Spokane and Spokane Valley. As I speak, Norway is passing law to ban all fossil fuel cars in the whole country within a few years, and India and Holland will probably follow suit. So what we're doing isn't radical. Can you imagine banning all fossil fuel cars in a country? Norway will do it. What we're asking and wanting to do is not radical. Currently, our city council is considering law to make train transportation of coal and crude oil much more safe. Direct Action Spokane wants to work in collaboration with that effort and to offer to the public an opportunity to discuss and vote on an amendment to our city charter which would directly ban all coal and crude oil transportation by rail through Spokane. Many of you have seen our proposal and agreed. I like Rick's recommendation that the city council just pass it directly. It would save a lot of legal trouble. I ask all of you to join me urging the city council to do this, or at the least place the proposal on the upcoming November ballot and oppose climate change head on. We could also begin the process of working cohesively as a region with every other community along the rails from Wyoming, the Wyoming Powder River Basin and Nebraska's back and fields to our west coast to stand together and make a declaration that climate change harms all humans and all ecosystems on Earth, and it is caused primarily by the arrogant greed of a few corporations. We must stop this gaiacide. This mass suicide by carbon combustion. If we don't, as Stephen Hawking said yesterday, quote, climate change, greed, and stupidity will end the human race, period, unquote. Thank you.
So we're going to finish up the formal speaking by 8:30 as we intended. And when we do that, I'll officially close the committee meeting, and then I'll turn it over to Todd to invite us into the social area there. Some of you have seen there's more cookies and drinks, and we're asking the speakers to go to the back of the room and kind of spread out. Some of them have materials, and we really hope that if anyone that you really agreed with and want to learn more, you ask them. If there's someone you disagreed with, engage with them and really talk. This is really about getting more information. Several of us from the council will still be here. We're going to want to hear what you think about things. And then I want to point out, Nathan from Senator Maria Cantwell's office is there, and he's in the back. He will be back there as well to listen to constituents. So that's just kind of the housekeeping piece. I wanted to speak really just on behalf of myself as a city council member on one of the things that I've been working on with Council Member Kinnear and Council President Stuckert is what is a legislative response? What can we do about these coal and oil trains given some of the limitations of city government? And President Stuckert was driving back from vacation from Minnesota. He planned to be here, but his car broke down, I think, in Montana, so he didn't make it here, but he wanted to convey his greetings to you and appreciation for working on this. Some of you might know that after the Mosier spill, he drove down to Mosier and stood with the mayor of Mosier and mayors all up and down the Columbia Gorge to stand together to ask that no more oil trains go through the gorge, that there's just no way to prevent a spill, and there's certain things that just have to change. And he feels pretty passionate about it, and when he gets back, he'll be glad to engage and lead on this issue. But as a city council member, we have a job to try to respond to almost an impossible situation. And you heard from Rick Eichstad, there's this thing called preemption out there, which basically says that the Congress gets to decide on international or interstate transport issues. And that's generally the case, but we've never faced anything like climate change. We've never faced anything like the explosiveness of oil trains. And we live in a federalist system, and the system tries to divide up power between the national government, the state government, the local government. And really, no matter what the issue, there aren't any true absolutes. Any lawyer or judge will tell you there's always an exception to the main rule. And there's a time and a place, I think, to call out that exception. And you heard Rick mention one of those exceptions, even on the Railway Safety Act, that says Congress gets to control and the Department of Transportation. Even under that act, they set out some exceptions. Are they ever upheld very often? No, they haven't. But again, we've never faced anything like this. The Commerce Clause, some of you have heard about, which is kind of the ultimate preemption, and that says local governments can't interfere with interstate commerce, that's violating our agreement with other states. But even in the Commerce Clause, the U.S. Supreme Court has said, no, there are exceptions, and we listed a case recently from the Great Lakes where a town wanted to protect itself from the pollution of steamers that were transporting goods back and forth in the Great Lakes. And the Supreme Court said, yep, no, that's a local issue. It's a local police power. And so as a city council member with some other members and as a lawyer who's actually gone to court on these issues before, we have tried to craft, well, not tried, we have crafted an ordinance, which is different than a charter amendment, which I'll get to in a moment. And it's an ordinance that looks at the exceptions that have been recognized under federal law that lets locals have some control over things that are very local. And there's two pieces to it. One on the oil trains is, as you heard from Rick, that if it's essentially local, unique safety issue, locals can get involved and regulate it. It's just that the courts rarely find one that they think is essentially uniquely local. Although even in the case he mentioned, the court did find a few things that were, just not the crux of it on that one. I would contend, and we put in the ordinance, that our Spokane aquifer is a little bit different than every other river that there's a railroad going across, and that's because it's the sole source drinking water. Not most rivers aren't. They're beautiful. They would be horribly damaged, but ours would destroy our local drinking water for a generation. And there's really no other place like that in the United States. And the Secretary of Transportation hasn't designed enough safety features to protect our aquifer. And so what we're saying is, we as a city council can claim the safety of aquifer and push back on that. Secondly, on coal trains, there's another exception. In coal trains, you might know, aside from their climate change issues, they also spread coal rocks and dust everywhere, not just in the railway, hundreds of feet off the tracks into people's land. And if anyone drove up to your property and took out a bag of sand and rocks and spread it all over the property, we would actually throw them in jail, actually, in the city of Spokane. That's a crime. And so that's a local issue, and the state and the feds have generally given locals control over that. And so every time a coal train goes through, it spreads dust and rocks onto innocent landowners. And we believe the city can regulate that. So we're working on that, and we might put it on the ballot and ask the voters to vote. We might pass it. We're talking about this in council. We'll go through that process. And you should let us know what you think about it. But it really is just talking about the main safety issues, trespass issues. It doesn't get to the bigger issues you've heard about today. And so you've heard about from Direct Action Spokane that they have been talking with council members and proposing a charter amendment, which the charter is our constitution, to essentially call out the climate change problem and permanently ban oil and coal trains from going through our city. That's potentially could be put on the ballot. There's nothing in conflict between that and the ordinance that we've been looking at that deals more with the safety issues. And we've been talking about them. Is there language that we can agree on that we could put on the ballot that wouldn't jeopardize the city's legal situation too much, that could call out the voters of this community to have a say? Because I think any lawyer who works on this will tell you the odds aren't particularly good of winning for sure permanently, or at least the first time any of this ordinance or charter comes up. There will be pushback because although there are exceptions, it takes a while for the court system to adjust to anything. And you've seen it in civil rights and many other causes that we have argued about and fought about for justice in this country. So it may not work the first time. And one of the things that I'm working is to make sure that if we put something on the ballot, that we actually get to vote on it. And so we're looking to work together for language that maximizes the chance that we as voters can tell the nation and the world what we want in Spokane, because that's the power that we were given under our Constitution, is to speak our mind and pursue happiness, and local government is supposed to secure safety and welfare for all. So we're working on those issues. We'd invite your feedback tonight, other times, so that we know that if we are going to push for that, that you're going to support it, because we really want, as council members, to be your voice out there. And beyond that, I just want to say I so appreciate all the speakers. I learned a lot tonight, for everyone for telling us their story and their version, and for all of you who care so much about it. Thank you so much for coming. I close this meeting and turn it over to Reverend Eckler.
Thank you again so much, Brian, and thank you all for being here. Just on a personal note, nobody said it explicitly, so I will say it's something that Direct Action Spokane has also been suggesting, is we do something like the Grant Township and pass an ordinance that makes some sort of direct action legal, so that if our laws are not honored, that we as citizens can take direct action and not be worried about being thrown in the slammer for it. So another suggestion. So I'm going to close with just a couple readings, and then I hope you'll stay around for snacks and coffee and more conversation, particularly with some of our presenters. But these are a couple of readings from the First Nations, and I think it's particularly important that we honor them. They've become all but wiped out due to the genocide at the beginning of the current incarnation of this nation, I'll put it that way. This very land has been desecrated that this church is on. It's named after George Wright. That's our Confederate flag that goes on all of our mail envelopes we send out from this church. And, we've talked, I see the signs, it's a global issue. It's not just a local safety issue, but, global warming is local. It's local and global. It's both at once. When you desecrate the earth, you desecrate our local community. When we desecrate our local community, we desecrate the earth. It's only one small planet. Global warming isn't localized. It's everywhere. So I'm going to give a couple of readings that I hope honor all people who have suffered, the First Nations as well as ourselves. The first one is from the Ute Indians of North America. And I'm going to take the liberty of substituting one word in both of these readings. I'm going to substitute the word earth with the word mama. Mama, teach me stillness as the grasses are stilled with light. Mama, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Mama, teach me caring as parents who secure their young. Mama, teach me courage as the tree which stands all alone. Mama, teach me limitation as the ant which crawls on the ground. Mama, teach me freedom as the eagle which soars in the sky. Mama, teach me resignation as the leaves which die in the fall. Mama, teach me regeneration as the seed which rises in the spring. Mama, teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Mama, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain. And finally, these words from Chief Noah Self. This we know, Mama does not belong to us. We belong to Mama. This we know, all things are connected like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls Mama befalls her sons and daughters. We did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. Amen.